I'm alive. I shouldn't be.
He should not be alive. This is unfucking believable.
From the heart of trucker America, my boy Reed Coverdale, host of The Naturalist Capitalist.
This is what government does. It sucks.
If you think you're going to win people over by stating commonplaces, you're just selling the other part.
It is about dictating every transaction that you have for the rest of your life.
Mr. Potato Head.
Coverdale is the guy to be president of the United States.
You intimidated me with your perfect 74 stat.
That was the beginning of my problems.
He died doing what he loved, chasing a minor.
But I'll put a 50 cal attached to my Suburban.
Libertarians need to get out of New York.
The gulag is going to be in your house.
This guy's a fucking murderer. He deserves to be in a gun
Gotta get him out of that truck at night and get him into the White House.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Naturalist Capitalist. I'm your host, Reed Coverdale. So I just want to start off by saying I did make another Twitter account. We'll see how long this one lasts. I made one a couple days ago and it literally lasted 3 minutes. I think I followed Dave Smith and then I was searching for Liberty Lockdown and then that was it. I was just zapped immediately. But I am back. I am using the name at US Liberty 1967. If you get the joke, good for you. USS Liberty was already taken. So was USS Liberty 67 and USS Liberty 1967. So I just went with US Liberty 1967. Gets the point across enough. So that's me. Go follow me there if you want. No idea how long that's going to last, but Twitter is temporary, not forever. So it is what it is. I'll probably just keep coming back like this because the sad thing is I've been trying to get you guys to go over to Telegram. I've been advertising at every show. Within 2 hours of creating this Twitter account, I had more followers on Twitter already than after weeks and weeks of trying to get people over to Telegram. It's just a joke. No one wants to leave YouTube. No one wants to leave Twitter. No one wants to leave Facebook, even though they censor the shit out of everything and like push us way down low on the algorithm so no one finds us or whatever. Doesn't matter. No one wants to leave. So I guess I'm just going to be weaving in and out and getting banned here and there as I go and trying to still get you to migrate. So speaking of that, in the description, I've got a link to my Telegram channel. Go follow me there. I don't get censored. They don't kick people off Telegram, or at least no one that I've been associating with. So go follow me on Telegram, and then my Substack is also linked in the description. Go follow me there. And then I've got a link tree to all my other platforms. I'm going to start trying to use Gab. Gab is, I have like 115 followers on it or something, but I still get more traffic on Gab with 115 followers than I do on Facebook with like 850 followers or whatever it is. Because Facebook, it's a joke. I can't. I'll post something, no one will see it. Even if it's into a group with 10,000 people in it, it'll get 2 likes or something. And they've even explicitly told me they were going to do that to me because I've been banned a few times or not banned, but suspended for, a couple days or whatever. And it says your posts will be pushed to the bottom in groups when you post it, so no one will see it. So Facebook sucks. I'm still going to use it just because so many people are familiar with it. But please go follow me on Gab too and start pushing shit there. Anyway, all that out of the way, I've got a good guest today. I got to meet him in person out at Freedom Fest in Vegas. We got to die in the 111-degree heat and have a good time otherwise at the conference there. Connor Freeman, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Reed. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So just for people who don't know you, what do you do? You write for the Libertarian Institute and you're great on Twitter. What else do you do? What's your involvement?
Coming from you,
Liberty?
that means a lot. I'm and I'm glad to see you back on, man. But I'm the assistant editor at the Libertarian Institute, and I co-host Conflicts of Interest with Kyle Anzalone and Will Porter. And I've been writing some news articles for antiwar.com lately. I got Twitter at Freeman's Mind 96. Most of everything I do goes up at the Institute. So if you want to follow me, just keep track of what everything we're doing at libertarianinstitute.org and you'll see it.
Yeah. So you're a younger guy like me. When did you get into this? What inspired you? I mean, I'm assuming it wasn't Ron Paul. It seems like it would have been later on, but was it Ron Paul when you were in school, or what like got you interested in all this stuff?
Yeah. Well, when I was a kid, I had well, I grew up in like the 9/11 era. Like I remember that day, and I was 4 years old. And so that affected me quite a bit. I mean, it wasn't long before we lived in a state of permanent paranoia and fear,
Right.
over, a statistical anomaly. And I didn't even know really the backstory at all. Yeah. I basically was just, my dad almost died that day. He was supposed to, he changed his flight plans 2 weeks ahead, but he was supposed to be on flight 175, the one that flew into the South Tower. And so, it was the era of Fox News and all this kind of stuff. So basically grew up like that. But so if I knew of Ron Paul around 2008 and 2007, but basically, I think a lot of Fox News in that era, the idea was, at least my understanding of Ron Paul was basically he's just this old crank who wants to legalize drugs and prostitution and everything like that. So it didn't really get to me at that point. I basically was like a Republican for a while, and then I thought, to me, like in high school, becoming a Democrat meant like, well, I'll watch Jon Stewart and the Colbert Report, and that'll be like, this will piss off my parents or whatever. Like 'cause I had been a Republican basically forever, and after like a month of that, I was like, this is really stupid. And I found Bill Hicks, the stand-up comedian, who was just a revelation. I'd never heard the term military-industrial complex, and the guy was talking about, drugs and freedom and liberty in a whole kind of way that I had never really seen. The great Bill Hicks, comedian who died in like 1994 at 32, but I think he's my favorite comedian who ever lived. But yeah, that basically led me somehow into getting really into like comedy podcasts, and eventually I heard Dave Smith's first appearance on the Ari Shaffir show in 2013 called "Fuck the Government," and I knew of libertarianism. Like I knew Kokesh and Molyneux and Ron Paul and Peter Schiff and these guys, but it just, for whatever reason, it just didn't click. And then once I heard Dave, I'm sure he mentions Murray Rothbard and the Mises Institute on there, and talking about war and cops in a way that I hadn't really heard anybody do. It reminded me a bit of Hicks, but it got me into enough where I was like, okay. And I started listening to his show. And then very quickly, I just it was like in 1 week, I think I listened to him and Tom Woods. I subscribed to Tom's show and got into the Mises Institute and started reading Ron Paul books. And then from that point on, I kind of relived the Ron Paul moment through reading these books, watching all of his debates, that giant compilation that's on YouTube. That's like 7 hours long. I think I listened to that a few times, and read all of his books. And then I started reading the books we all go through, which are like, the Rothbard, like What Has Government Done to Our Money, and Hazlitt Economics, One Lesson. And then eventually through all this, just reading a bunch of these books, and eventually I found, I guess it was either the Liberty Report or the Scott Horton Show. But at some point I got very into foreign policy and started reading it. Once I started reading antiwar.com, that was kind of it. I just decided like, this is the stuff I'm interested in. And I was always a good writer. So I just sort of applied that skill set to writing about this kind of stuff. And that's basically how I got here.
Yeah, the Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com guys, what I like about all of you, and it was cool hanging out with all you guys at Freedom Fest. And I was telling Pat McFarland that there's like this search for unbridled truth without dumb like populist or culture war overtones or whatever. It's just like, just tell us like what's really happening. Tell us how evil everybody is. We want to know everything bad that everybody's doing. We don't want to be like, oh yeah, but these are the good guys and these guys are a little, like, just tell us everything. That's what's always attracted me about you guys. Have you always been that way? Have you always been like, I don't want to hear anything that makes me feel good, I just want to know what's actually happening? Has that been a feature that you've always had, like looking for that, or is that something you've acquired? Or and do you think that's accurate too? Like,
oh yeah, I think we're all like that, which is a really good thing, because I don't. Yeah, I always identify with as far as like the libertarian movement goes. I mean, I'm a Rothbardian, but as far as like factions go, I really more identify with like antiwar.com and the Institute before I even work for the Institute, and the Ron Paul Institute. Those guys like Ron and Dan and Scott and Eric Garris and now Dave DeCamp, and of course Kyle and all of our great Keith and Pat and all these guys. And so to me, yeah, and also I think part of the reason for that is because I guess I learned more about quite a bit more about foreign policy. I don't think I was reading antiwar.com before Trump became president. And that first year, Scott's book, Fool's Errand, came out. That had a big impact on me, especially and learning about the buildup to the 9/11 and the war on terror and what got us there. But really, I think, I'll be honest with you, just because of reading certain books at the time when Trump was running, like I think I was reading some Bob Murphy and some Tom Woods, like, stuff about the Great Depression and the New Deal, and just his, I think Woods is like Politically Incorrect Guide to American History and stuff like this. Like, for whatever reason, I saw Trump and just kind of, like, I could tell, like, because I grew up, like I said, my family's not like that anymore. My dad is pretty much an ANCAP, but like,
oh, nice.
yeah, but it's like, it's really funny because I just grew up with the Fox News crap. So I knew when I saw him, I was like, this is not what people, couldn't articulate that, like, this could be really bad and this guy could accelerate this new Cold War or whatever what he ended up doing, basically. But I could sort of tell, like, well, he's talking about like bringing back torture and empowering the national security state. Like, he was going to try and empower the surveillance state. And he's talking about how he wants to bomb the shit out of ISIS and all this stuff about the Iran deal. It seemed to me to be too, he was speaking out of, basically, I guess, to answer your question, I never really got into the whole thing about him being some sort of a populist or him being a counterweight to the deep state. I saw him as more of like, and I think this is ultimately true, I think he represented another faction of the deep state. And I think that they realized that they need somebody in there who could transition, whether or not certain factions, obviously, like with the Russiagate lies and everything that happened, throughout his administration when he was getting attacked by, Brennan and Comey and all these guys. I think that there's a definite group of neoconservatives who have power, who infected his administration, and I don't think he really would have stopped that, because he had the opportunity to bring in good people in his administration. He didn't get the briefings that were sent to him, but he could have had people like Doug Bandow, who writes for, he works at the Cato Institute and writes for antiwar.com and the American Conservative and stuff like this. Like, they could have brought somebody in like him, an anti-war, realist, foreign policy thinker, a libertarian. And, but they didn't do that. And, I think that basically they need somebody in there who the Republicans, I think he helped transition them from being obsessed with terrorism and Muslims and all this into supporting the new Cold War with China. I think that was a big part of what he succeeded in doing. And I think what they also learned was that he could accelerate policies in the Middle East, but rebrand them. So, like, you notice a lot of people talk about how he brought peace to the Middle East with the Abraham Accords and things like this. But all that is throwing the Palestinians under the bus and, building the foundation for what Biden is trying to do now, which is building this anti-Iran NATO-style alliance, surrounding them and providing all this military aid to, well, not aid in Israel's case, but massive arms sales to groups like to the UAE, for instance. And that was a part of these phony normalization deals with Israel. And of course, Israel has this, they have the qualitative military edge, or the quantitative military edge, where basically they use these agreements and these arms sales to these other states that they're not really at odds with at all, to justify saying, well, now you need to basically double down on the military aid you give us so we can maintain our supremacy in the region militarily. And so it's not a peace deal and by any stretch. And even when early on in the Biden administration, people thought he was going to tilt more towards Eastern Europe and the Asia Pacific, Brett McGurk, who famously, I believe he was the envoy for the anti-ISIS coalition. He resigned when Trump said he was going. One of the times when Trump said he was going to leave Syria, and this is a guy who supports the Israeli airstrikes that happen almost every week in Syria. And now he's the national security coordinator for the Middle East on Biden's National Security Council. And they basically did this almost about face thing where, like, even if they were kind of playing with that idea, especially after the Afghanistan withdrawal, they were like, no, it's back to basics. We're not leaving. And and basically, I think that has a lot to do with the Israel lobby. But also, I mean, you just saw they sold like, $5 billion worth of arms, or not. They've approved them anyway, like these Patriot missiles to Saudi and missiles to the UAE. But I guess what I'm saying is I see Trump as more or less building a bridge for the new era. And it was codified in this counterterrorism, in this national defense strategy from 2018 under Mattis, where they said, we're shifting away from counterterrorism in North Africa and the Middle East toward great power competition with Russia and China. And I learned about the Asia pivot, a couple of years ago, and started to realize, because I was reading Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, his whole buildup with China was really carrying on with an Obama policy, which is very this is that's why I said in this recent article, I'm like, this is the Democrats' project. So this whole idea that Republicans are like, yeah, well, we get it, like, we're not falling for this shit about Russia. We're America first. We want to go prepare for war with China because they're the number one threat. They're just regurgitating Pentagon propaganda and stuff that comes from the Democrats. The guy running his Asia policy now is the architect of the Asia pivot under Biden, and it's like, you guys are trying to out-Democrat the Democrats and how much you want to go, how much you want to confront China and build up against them. It seems counterintuitive. And I thought, and hopefully that's a good strategy, is to kind of show them, like, you hate the military-industrial complex, you want to put America first, and you hate the Democrats, right? Well, then, facilitating all this is not the way to go.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting to see how they kind of transition from one administration to the next and weaponize the dissenters into almost becoming warmongers because their guy ends up supporting it in a different flavor. So a great documentary everyone should watch is Robbie Martin's A Very Heavy Agenda, because it goes into how Bill Kristol, Robert Kagan, all the Project for New American Century people, they infiltrate Obama's administration, and Obama, the anti-Iraq war guy, ends up being supported by the same people who pushed for the Iraq war and expanding that, ideology to other countries instead of just Iraq. So, they've obviously done that with Trump, to the point you're making too. What I find interesting about it is, just like with Obama, you had the neocons angry that he didn't want to straight up invade Syria or to go as hard as they wanted him to in all these conflicts. They would constantly say he's a weak president. He has this foreign policy of leading from behind where it was so removed from the truth. And they absolutely did that to Trump too. They acted like Trump was this pacifist isolationist, where that was ridiculous. He didn't start a new war, that is true, but he ramped the one in Afghanistan up until the very end. Drone strikes weren't even being monitored anymore because they were so off the charts. He elevated basically everything, but they would still criticize him from a more neoconservative perspective of he's not doing enough. And what I think is funny now is with this FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago, I've tried to point to people that they can't go after Trump for any of his really egregious crimes because everybody who's going after him is equally complicit in the really evil things, whether it's war crimes or connections to Epstein, whatever it is. They can't touch it because if they start uncovering that, then their connections to the same things will be uncovered. But it's impressive how they try to create these false dichotomies as the winds switch in each direction. I'm never not amazed at how well they can manipulate that, I guess.
Yeah, I've been that was one of and I got to give credit to Robbie because I think he's brilliant, and that documentary had a huge effect on me. And I think one of the things about what he does to me, I think he has a healthy paranoia about what infiltration and people who co-opt movements, and that's something that libertarians should be on guard. We should be very skeptical of that kind of infiltration. It's one of the reasons why I'm probably one of the least enthusiastic people about lining up with Republicans or even the populists, right? Because I just don't trust it. Like I find some of these people, whether it's Blake Masters or Joe Kent or whoever they are, JD Vance, to be very either they don't tell you enough about them or they just actually have bad foreign policies. And I don't know if this is still the case, but I know that Joe Kent, for instance, his his campaign site said a bunch of stuff about how we should strengthen. This is before the war in February, in Ukraine, that we should strengthen NATO. We should cut off Europe from Russian gas. We should expand the Abraham Accords. We should confront China with a coalition of nations and all this stuff. And I'm just like, I don't see anything about, and this is true for Masters too, because Masters has even less information on his campaign site now than when I got into an argument with some post-libertarians about this guy, like at the beginning of the year. And I went to it recently. There's still, his only thing about foreign policy is about what a big threat China is, and how, I think it's something about intellectual property or something like this, digital warfare. That's the other thing Kent said. I think Kent said China has already declared war against us, and so we have to act accordingly. And I know JD Vance is like very bad on the Iran deal. I mean, it's really funny because I cover the Iran deal on a week. I mean, Iran news and JCPOA news on conflicts of interest week by week. And I mean, he has a quote that Daniel Larison, who is probably the best right winger on foreign policy. Daniel Larison's he writes again for antiwar.com and the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, formerly at the American Conservative. And he wrote a piece about JD Vance about his Iran policy. And there's a quote in there that I found where JD Vance characterizes Biden's policy on Iran as being obsessed with returning to the deal. It's August 14th, 2022. We're closer to war with Iran now than any time basically under Trump. I mean, honestly, like the amount of, he is literally trying to encircle Iran, like I said, with this mini NATO alliance. I don't think that's going to be as successful, but those arms sales to the Saudis and the UAE could, be an indication that they might be more successful behind the scenes than we think. But at the same time, he is expanding sanctions. It looks like they do not want to return to the deal. I mean, the Iranians keep making concession after concession, but the Israelis have been drone striking Iran, particularly this year. And, they do these quadcopter suicide drone attacks. So they hit a military complex in Parchin, the Parchin military complex, which is not far from Tehran, and they killed an engineer there. They had most likely the MEK assassinate this IRGC Colonel Hassan Syed Kodeh in his driveway. A couple of guys on motorcycles just shot him in his car to death. And then there's been a series of poisonings and all kinds of accidents where people were described as martyrs. It's all these people who are either in the IRGC or they're connected to the aerospace industry in Iran. And they carried out a drone attack in Kermanshah on their drone, one of their drone facilities. The Iranians' drone facilities destroyed much of their drone fleet. There was an attack in Tabriz reportedly, which actually killed some people, and it's caused. I mean, if they have done this, if they've actually killed 6 people, it's unprecedented, because the Israelis, when they would kill those nuclear scientists in the Obama administration, it's 4 or 5 people in the span of 2 years. And this whole assassination campaign I just laid out it was really over the course of a month. And Biden's whole point is we support everything Israel does, and we're very proud of our support for Israel. And then he goes to I guess it was Jerusalem, and signed the Jerusalem Declaration. It's this joint declaration where he says we'll use all of our national power to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. And he said he would use force if necessary. And the thing is, Iran has never sought nuclear weapons. But our policy at this point is really driving them to do that. I mean, there are certain hawks in Iran and outside Iran who want Iran to leave the Non-Proliferation Treaty, their safeguards agreement with the IAEA that they've been in since 1970. And if they do that, they might as well have a bomb at that point, right? Because not that most Americans know about the NPT, but I mean, under the deal, Republicans still basically believe Iran is seeking a bomb or has one. The statistics of how many people know about Israel's nukes versus how many people think Iran has nukes are really disconcerting.
Yeah.
I mean, at the same time, we're at brinksmanship with Russia and China. This is also happening at the same time. And, I mean, I don't know how these arms sales are going to affect, again, the Yemen ceasefire and things like this. But I got to say, I wrote a piece about Trump at the very end of his administration in 2020 for the Institute called "Nothing Delivered: Trump's Anti-War Deceptions." And it could have sounded like I was exaggerating at the time, but I did say like, yeah, he may not have started any new wars, but he has actually set the stage for brinksmanship with Russia and China. So whatever happens next, and I think as soon as Biden came in, he basically ramped up much of the same policies, like pretty clearly. He sent a B-52 bomber over the Persian Gulf in his like first week in office. And they sent warships to the Black Sea. I mean, they drastically escalated the naval presence in the Black Sea. But we had ships in there for like 182 days last year, according to Stars and Stripes. And it was all based on this nonsense about like, oh, well, with COVID, we really we didn't have our ships in the Black Sea as much as we would have liked to. So we've got to really amp that up this year. And I think they basically just jumped the shark, because they carried out the largest war drills throughout Eastern Europe. This Defender Europe 21, Pat McFarlane has an excellent piece about this called The Danger of Great Power Competition with Russia and China, or the Danger of Great Power Competition at the Institute. And and he talks about this. I mean, these were the largest drills since the Cold War era, all throughout Eastern Europe, much of it on Russia's borders, went on for months. And, they were doing drills in Ukraine, like not just in the Black Sea with like 30 plus countries doing naval exercises, preparing for war or enhancing interoperability, as they call it. But like, preparing for war with Russia. And one of them was Rapid Trident 21. And that actually was carried out. Ukraine hosted it, and it was with NATO allies. Like that's the thing, like Ted Carpenter talks about, it's like they made Ukraine a de facto NATO state. And that's probably the main thing really that led to this war. But yeah, I mean, if you look at like the China stuff, I mean, he just sent like an aircraft carrier and several warplanes to the South China Sea, sailed a warship to the Taiwan Strait. All this stuff happened like almost as soon as Biden came into office. And next thing you know, he's got 2 aircraft carriers in the South China Sea doing military drills and preparing for war. And it's been pretty shocking to see, like you said, about the seamless. And that's the thing. Like, if you look at, like Robbie was talking, Robbie shows in that documentary, the Foreign Policy Initiative, and how it comes out of PNAC, sort of Kagan and Crystal rebranding their sort of PNAC is defunct. And then they do this thing during the Obama years. And one of the things that's interesting is you get to learn like about Josh Rogan. And so Josh Rogan had a piece like last week, maybe, or the week before. Anyway, if y'all look up Washington Post, Josh Rogan, he's Bill Kristol's boy at the Washington Post. He has an article out right now that's about how, well, we can take on Russia and China at the same time. We have to. It's our obligation as however he phrases it. But he says in there, which is very interesting, because it seems to me that they actually do get what's going on here, what you and I are concerned about. Because he goes, there's this, he calls it right and left, and I don't know if that's the right term, but he's like, there's this problem. He's like, because the left hates Russia and they want to really expand the confrontation of Russia and they want to escalate with Russia. He's like, but they kind of want to ease off on China. And the Republicans, they want to really expand and confront, expand in the Asia Pacific and basically militarily confront China. But they're not enthusiastic about expanding NATO with Finland and Sweden and funding the war in Ukraine and all this and confronting Putin. And he's like, but thankfully we have all these great lawmakers from both parties in power right now who support all of it. And like, if a guy like that, who's just, a neocon, who's not really, I mean, he's more, I guess, a centrist. I don't think he really you could call him like necessarily a Democrat or Republican. I'm not sure. I guess I don't know enough about Rogan specifically, but if you read this, it's basically him saying that, yeah, it would be nice if we could get the whole American public on to like hating both Russia and China as much as we do. But basically he's saying, I think we got a good thing going here. It seemed to me like that's what he was saying. Like, because we've got enough support for both of these, they're both parts of the new Cold War. And, if you look at like Bob Menendez, who just introduced this Taiwan Policy Act of 2022, it's like completely upending the one China policy. And talking about making Taiwan a major non-NATO ally and giving them $4.5 billion of military aid every over 4 years, and expanding their involvement in international institutions and changing the name of the de facto embassy in the U.S. from the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office to the Taiwan Representative Office, which would basically give it an official status. All these things are extremely hawkish, and they talk about how like they're going to remove basically all the restrictions on bilateral relations between American officials and their Taiwanese counterparts, which is extremely hawkish and what ultimately has led to this crisis currently with the drills all around Taiwan because of Pelosi's visit. I mean, it was just the coup de grace on top of all these, which started under Trump, but sending like all these congressional delegations. There's another one heading over there soon. And high-level officials basically just trampling over the one China policy and sending the message to, like, as they call them, independence forces that, hey, we, and actually Menendez says in his article for the New York Times promoting this, he goes, it's something like we're laying out the vision for how we will defend Taiwan for decades to come. So, I mean, he's like, we need less ambiguity in this policy. And if you look at like the Republicans, they just think and Lindsey Graham is the co-sponsor, of course, but they think like basically, I don't know. I guess I definitely need to pay more attention to like right-wing media, like new right media. But from what I can see, it sounds to me like they basically still think, like I saw Matt Gaetz on Jesse Waters the other day on Fox News, and he said, the Chinese have taken over the federal government without firing a shot. Yeah. I'm like, I don't know where we go from there, but I think we have a real opportunity. I think the LP has a big opportunity. With the whole Mar-a-Lago thing, I don't know. I mean, I guess we need to double down on our efforts because this is going to suck a lot of air out of the room, I think. And there's going to be so much more. I mean, people are going to rally around him now. People we could really, it would be worthwhile to recruit people. Because I think the people who want America first and want to end these endless wars, I think they've basically just been, not to be like patronizing or anything, but I think that, if you're in an echo chamber, libertarians are in echo chambers too, right? Anti-war people are in echo chambers too. But like, if everyone keeps telling you like China, 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 and I mean, it's gotta be pretty, I mean, we need a new Giuliani moment basically on that issue. And I think that's what I think Dave has a real chance to do that, which would be awesome.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the China hawk neocons are viewed as potential allies where, I mean, Ron Paul could have thought that way about Republicans in 2007. He could have been like, well, it's more likely that I'm going to be able to influence Republicans, so I don't want to tell them their heroes suck and that, they've been bamboozled. But that's exactly what he did. He told them, no, you guys are 100% wrong. This is why they attacked us, laid it all out in front of them, didn't sugarcoat it at all. And a lot of people seem to be cautious to do that with the so-called populist right today. They don't want to step on their toes, don't want to make them feel uncomfortable. Where I'd make the argument now is the time to make them uncomfortable because they're already, they've already been pushed out of their comfort zone by the last couple of years. And a lot of them, if you just straight up tell them the facts, you say, look, this is what Trump said he was going to do, and this is what he did. These are the bills he signed. Here's the legislation right here. Here's his signature. A lot of them will listen to you, and they'll be like, wow, I did not know that. I didn't think that was the case. So this whole idea that we need to just be like really easy on them and, just kind of like lightly encourage them in the right direction and not say any harsh words. I mean, these are right wingers. Right wingers are supposed to be tough anyway, right? Like that's kind of their persona. So, I mean, most of my life I've worked with right wingers. The culture is say what you mean what you say. That's what they expect from you. So do it to them. Like tell them, hey man, I love you, brother, but you're wrong. This is what's really going on. I don't know.
Well, no, I think that was the point I made in this recent piece for the Institute. Cause it's like, Ron Paul's, that Giuliani moment he got booed. Like, I mean, I think I've heard McAdams tell this story, Dan McAdams, a couple times that he didn't think that went well. Mm-hmm. But they realized online people were going nuts for it, but in the room, I mean, Jesus, talk about like, I mean, they all want to basically at the end of that clip, everybody knows on YouTube, they all want to jump in so they can attack him. Yeah. And they're like, wait a minute. Mitt Romney's like, I want to get 30 seconds. And then one of the other ones like, I want my 30 seconds. And like, but like, the thing is that's what actually changes people. Like Bill Hicks for me was like a big slap upside the head.
Right.
Like Ron Paul was like that for me too. Like hearing Dave Smith talk about the wars and talk about all these kinds of things. That's war is Murray Rothbard opens For a New Liberty, or at least the second chapter, which I think used to be the beginning of the book, by saying, hey, war is mass murder, taxation is theft, and conscription is slavery. That's how you change people.
Right.
Like you gotta be serious. I mean, you can't pull back because
well, I think it's also
otherwise
like
they'll just be like, oh, you guys are cool. But
yeah.
like that doesn't change anything. Like, so what? If you like, I don't know. I mean, I was gonna say, like, I mean, if a bunch of libertarians get on like Tim Pool's show, but they just kind of like hang out with him and talk shit, and it's like just like trying to boost your own platform or whatever. I think that's not the way to do it. I think what Scott did is the way to do it. Cause like finally somebody came in and basically debated him about this China stuff because, I mean, Pat sent me a video recently where Pool's like, Taiwan is the real ruler of China. Like I want to see reunification where Taiwan rules the whole mainland.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, because they're illegitimate because the commies took over in 1949 and all this. I'm like, dude, you're like, I mean, that's to the right of Trump and Biden. That's way far out there. That people don't realize how crazy that is. Yeah. We do not have the power to do that. We don't have the money. And just playing with this whole thing, we're going to escalate with Taiwan and use them as a way to counter China. Because like there's a quote from I think Raymond Green, who's like the deputy director of our de facto embassy in Taiwan, where he's like, in previous decades, the Taiwan issue was seen more as like a something that needed to be mitigated to better U.S.-China relations. He's like, but now we see it as a great way to counter China. And as a way to they have all this rhetoric where it's like, well, we just want a free and open Indo-Pacific, or it's like Tucker Carlson will talk about, we need to. I mean, he even said the other day on the show, like, because Colonel McGregor, Douglas McGregor, had a great appearance on his show about this whole thing with Pelosi, but right before it, Tucker's like saying, like, calling her out for being like provocative, right? But he's in the middle of his thing. I'm watching. He's like, now, there may be good reasons to prepare for war with China because that could be inevitable. I'm like, how the fuck is it inevitable? That's like, I mean, that's crazy. We are not fighting a war with a nuclear superpower that can hit the United States with, warheads tipped on 3-stage intercontinental missiles.
Right.
We're not doing that. It's just insane. Like, I remember him, I think it was talking to Tulsi, and they were talking about how crazy the war in Ukraine is. And can you believe we're risking nuclear war for Ukraine? And he's like, no, there may be reasons to like go to war with a major power, like perhaps to protect shipping lanes in the South China Sea. I'm just like, it's just the logic of all of, there's really no logic. I think that, and I know Tucker does some good work. I do. And that's one of the things that's interesting about it. Because I do think that they've, I've been saying this for a while now. I think that somebody has to realize this, and it's not just us, that everybody hates Hillary Clinton and John McCain. And I don't think that'll really work anymore. Like, people you can't get rid of Chuck Schumer and you can't get rid of, thanks, Dave. And you can't get rid of.
We got the flannel and beard gang here. It's good.
We didn't even plan it. It's just, but I think, you can't get rid of Chuck Schumer and people like this and Bob Menendez and all these hawks, Lindsey Graham. I mean, I don't know how you actually get rid of them. I think they're going to die in office. Pelosi, people like this. Well, maybe Pelosi will lose, but I think, she certainly won't be House Speaker now, but I think basically they need people who can, they need people who at least appeal, like they have to diversify. There's like a division, there's an obvious division of labor that comes in. Cause like, you can't just be for going to war with every one of the empire's enemies, cause it's too obvious and people don't respect that anymore. So you need people who are like, either they're really bad on, they're really pro-Israel, or they're really bad on, continuing to fight any, bomb Sunnis all over the place with drones and sending special operations forces all over, Africa. or they're just China hawks and they're better on Russia, or they're big Russia hawks. And, it's just weird. Like I remember Bernie Sanders' campaign site. I think it's still up there. It says we need to phase out Assad.
Oh yeah, he was awful on that.
he's like big pro sanctions on Russia guy.
Oh yeah, he sucks.
Yeah, they all voted for that Ukraine aid bill, like all these progressive Democrats, and it's like
with Bernie, like I'm so sick of people calling him a sellout. It's like this is Bernie forever. You look back into the 90s, he voted to bomb Kosovo. He voted for the Iraqi Liberation Act. He voted to fund the war in Iraq after only voting against George W. Bush's unilateral invasion. He's fucking awful. Like he's been bad on everything. But anyway, I just had to throw that in there. So.
No, but you're 100% right. Like that's why Ron Paul is kind of. I mean, that's the model, obviously, and because and look, no one. I mean, I have to imagine. I hope. Like I know because I follow a lot of leftists on Twitter. Like Bernie Sanders is basically viewed by much of the left the way you just described him.
Yeah.
And I think that's really healthy.
They're just wrong that he's a sellout. He's a fraud. Yeah. He's always been this way. Like it's not like he was good until 2016 and then he sold out to Hillary. It's like that is Bernie. That's what he's always been. But,
yeah.
I
mean, he's a big booster of like getting the F-35 built in Vermont because it's good for the workers.
Yeah,
So
that's what we were talking about earlier. The different flavor on neoconservatism. Like, oh well, if it's good for jobs for middle income Americans, then it's neoconservatism's fine. Dropping bombs is fine. So I did want to talk about this a little bit because you and I at Freedom Fest, I got interviewed by the what is it called? Yeah, now I'm forgetting the name of it. The podcast there, Live and Let Live podcast. And you said you had been interviewed by him a couple months earlier or something. And I think I agree with that guy on like all of his philosophy. I mean, he believes every individual has rights to their own property, rights over themselves, complete agency to do whatever they want as long as they're not hurting other people. Totally agree with that. But then we got into foreign policy a little bit and it started getting weird because he started saying stuff like we need to stand for the rights of people everywhere. And I was like, what does that mean? Like, I mean, conceptually, I agree. Like if you were to ask me, does a person in Saudi Arabia have the same rights I do? I would say yes. But what can I do to enforce that? Like, that's where it gets weird. Like, and he also wouldn't quite get to the point of saying, he'd be like, yeah, I don't think we should intervene over there either, but we need to like stand for their individual rights. And I was like, dude, that's so vague. And I don't understand like what that implies other than basically green lighting intervention. And, we hear a lot from legitimate evil war hawks who use this. They use this language to encourage intervention, whether it's Bill Kristol talking about women in Afghanistan and the rights are going to be trampled on by the Taliban taking over again, whether it's China hawks talking about the CCP and how awful they are. But then also I hear it from people who I really don't think have thought through it very much and are actually coming at it from, they're coming at it from a sincere place. Like they actually care about the people there. And they actually are sad that they're being killed and, imprisoned for their beliefs or politically trodden upon, whatever it is. But I wanted to talk with you about like how that is actually dangerous. Because in reality, there is nothing you can do about someone in Taiwan who is going to be who could be like under Chinese rule if China actually ends up politically or militarily taking over Taiwan, whatever it is. There's nothing that you can really do to stop that or make their life better. And in fact, if you get involved with it from a political standpoint, you're actually probably going to make it worse, especially like with Taiwan and with Ukraine. Like with Ukraine, we made that situation worse by sticking our finger in it. There wasn't a ton of incentive for Putin to invade Ukraine without us arming the shit out of Ukraine and ignoring the Minsk II agreement and all this stuff that finally made him kind of say, okay, whatever, I guess you're going to push my hand. And there's a very similar situation taking place with Taiwan right now. Like China does not want to militarily invade Taiwan. It would be such a miscalculation on their part because you'd turn the people against them. They're slowly starting to politically win over Taiwan anyway. But I just wanted your thoughts on this whole concept. When people come from a good place and they're speaking passionately about defending human rights in other places, but there's not really anything they can do about it, and all they're doing is kind of greenlighting government action that will just make this worse. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, so no, I had a great conversation with those guys. It just took a weird turn at the end because he was asking me questions about what you're just saying. Because I forget what country he was talking about, but he was basically making the point of like, well, listen. He basically painted as like Russia was totally in the wrong in going into Ukraine, which I don't deny. There were other things that they could have done. They could have cut gas off to Europe and basically leaned on Europe, and they're using their energy dependence on Russia to their advantage to get them to press for an implementation of the Minsk II Accords, and also getting the Americans to really take seriously and act on some of these demands that were made in the security proposals that they had submitted in the months prior to the war, which are all things. I mean, a lot of the stuff that they could have done to prevent that war is still actually possible. Like they could restore the INF Treaty. Right. They could, which Trump ripped up. They could not install. They could roll back military infrastructure in Eastern Europe back to where it was before 1997 and abide by the NATO-Russia Founding Act and things like this. There's a lot of things. He could rescind the invitation to Kiev to join NATO and all these things. And that would go a long way. They could recognize Crimea, just take eat some humble pie or whatever and just do it. Cause it's like, it's none of your business. They wouldn't have, seized Crimea. I mean, they didn't kill anybody when they did it, but that wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the coup and 2014 when they overthrew Yanukovych and all this and threatened, the Sevastopol naval base and all this stuff. So he could do all that. The reason they don't do it is because they want the war to keep going. To your point about this question, I think it reflects a certain problem with libertarianism, which to me is just a symptom of they're not. To put it like politely, I just don't think they're reading enough antiwar.com. Like we have so many things we could do to actually help people. Maybe not be freer and maybe not have their natural rights, their Rothbardian, Lockean natural rights respected. But what we could do is we could stop supporting Saudi Arabia, and we could stop supporting the UAE, and we could end the war in Yemen, and we could stop sending aid to Israel, and we could announce to everybody that they have nuclear weapons, and that and just realize that what we've been doing for the past since the 1970s has been illegal. Giving all.
I've been making this point all year long. I'm like, if you guys hate genocide and you hate occupations and you hate murder, like, let's clean our own house first. Let's stop funding it. Let's stop propping it up. Stop supporting it. Go on.
I'm a little bit more like, I think that, and maybe this is wrong. I think some libertarians are basically universalists, which I get because in principle it makes sense. But I think at this time in history, our job is to basically work towards and do everything we can in our lifetimes to abolish this empire. It's the worst purveyor of violence, like Martin Luther King said, in our lifetimes in the whole world. So, and also, if you want to criticize other governments for rights abuses and for killing people and torturing people, okay, let's talk about the military dictatorship in Egypt. There's like a lot of things we could do. And if you want to talk about like these other things in other countries where people, then I would say talk about the satellites of the empire. Because there's a lot to choose from there. And also the other thing we could do is, instead of pointing our fingers at countries under sanctions where we're starving people to death by the tens of thousands, probably more. You look at like North Korea and Iran and how long we've had these. We don't really know what the excess death rate is in the Iran sanctions. We do know what happened in Iraq in the 90s. It's hundreds of thousands of children, hundreds of thousands of adults. But, we point our fingers at these people and go, well, look at, the Air Force literally told the Washington Post, like, officers, it's in Scott's book, Enough Already, where they're like, well, we bombed all the civilian infrastructure because these people are responsible for what their government does. Yeah, so are we. And that's the logic of, Al-Qaeda, basically, which is why they thought they were justified killing Americans, on 9/11. And so I think basically we have a lot of options here, and all of them involve ending our foreign interventions, backing, maybe not back apartheid in Palestine, and maybe we shouldn't have, backed a bunch of child molesting, heroin kingpin former communists in Afghanistan and warlords, and then all in the name of women and girls' schools, and then all of a sudden when we lose the war, we'll just starve them all to death. And no one talks about that. I never hear anybody say that we should do something about our own government here or some government overseas that our government supports and intervene there. Because what he was asking me was basically, do you support sending like private mercenary groups that are voluntarily funded into like authoritarian states to fight and basically fight for regime change in the name of liberty and freedom and whatever? And I said, no. I don't. I actually don't. Because here's the other thing. When people say that, it's usually not about some government that's backed by the US, which is interesting because it does kind of mean like they know that like what they're doing is wrong and that they could pay some serious consequences for it. Whereas I don't see many people getting, except for like our side, about, what the hell are former American special operators doing near the front lines in Ukraine, training them and helping plan operations against Russian soldiers. Why do we have NATO special operators from Lithuania and France and Britain and I believe Canada on the ground in Ukraine, again, doing similar things? We have the CIA mostly in Kiev, passing on massive amounts of intelligence to the Ukrainian armed forces and all this stuff. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. And it looks like they may actually be already attacking Crimea. And Dave DeCamp asked the State Department a little while ago, like, does this whole restriction on these high mobility artillery rocket systems, this restriction about not going into Russian territory and attacking them there, although there are reports of that already happening, not necessarily not with the HIMARS, but there have been reports where they're saying like they have like a Ukrainian intelligence officer and special operators saying, yeah, we're going behind enemy lines and planting explosives, and they don't even know what's going on. But he goes, does this restriction apply to Crimea? And they just told him Crimea is Ukraine. And that could really go. I mean, we could be in World War III very quickly because that's Russian territory. The people there, believe that, and the Russians do, and they're not going to. I mean, that's a real escalation. And so my point is like if the Russians sent private mercenaries, this is what I said to the guy. If the Russians or the Chinese sent private mercenaries to DC to, like, I don't know, overthrow our government, I don't think he would be going, well, let's hear them out, because, with the Waco massacre and, they're clearly they're bringing all these new IRS agents, and the fact that we have American citizens who are detained in solitary confinement for the January 6th thing. Like, I don't see people being like, let's hear these guys out. I think it's, they probably got some good arguments here. I think that, we would probably go to war with Russia and China, even if it was just some corporation voluntarily funded anarcho-capitalist Russian mercenary group. I don't think that would fly. And I think if you sent look, I mean, Trump tried to do coups in Venezuela. Yeah. People don't like that. It's not, it's especially when you're starving these countries to death. I just think we need to not. We have so much blood on our hands right now. And I think look, if we want to keep talking about how it's a democracy and all of this, then honestly, this blood is on our hands. Let's be honest. And we have kind of played around for a long time. We're like, okay, well, and I'm not saying, look, I am not saying like there needs to be I'm what he's saying. In other words, I would not advocate like violent resistance to this government, but I am saying that we need to do something to change these policies and stop all this mass murder and starvation, because we're responsible for it. And I think that it's just wrong to look abroad. In the meantime, your government has killed 1 million people in Iraq and 500,000 people in Syria, and who knows how many people, probably more than, at this point, maybe 500,000 in Yemen alone, in just all these countries. And we're like, yeah, but Cuba, they have horrible economic policies, and they're an authoritarian state. And I don't know, maybe we should close Guantanamo Bay before we start attacking Cuba for the way they treat their people. Maybe we should lift the embargo. By the way, this is all the stuff Ron Paul said.
Yeah.
I mean, his whole thing was diplomacy, engagement, free trade, and free travel and cultural exchange. And I think that should be the libertarian foreign policy. And I don't mean free travel for people like Lindsey Graham or Nancy Pelosi to go to Taiwan. I don't mean that.
I wanted to talk about Nancy Pelosi going to Taiwan because this is one of those areas where I saw Democrats who I was told a few years ago I was supposed to think were good on war and foreign relations and stuff, like Ro Khanna, who were applauding Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan because in the United States of America, we don't kowtow to authoritarian governments. We stand for freedom and we stand for the rights of the Taiwanese. Why was it bad why don't you just explain to people why it was bad for Nancy Pelosi to go to Taiwan and what that means for the people of Taiwan that she went there now?
Yeah, so we haven't sent a House Speaker to Taiwan since Newt Gingrich did it in 1997. It's 25 years ago. So while they talk about how it's precedent and we've done this before, it was a very different situation. It was after the third Taiwan Strait crisis. Gingrich actually went to China as well. And China was much weaker militarily at the time. And this is all coming in the wake of like what I said with, Biden. So Trump did not even fly 1,000 sorties. I say this like that's great, but like he flew like something like 980 sorties of spy planes in the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and the Yellow Sea. Biden escalated that to over 2,000. I mean, by November it was 2,000. By February, he's sending spy planes into the waters around China 75 times a month. In February of 21, we send warships to the Taiwan Strait constantly. Biden's constantly gaffing. Like every month, I should say. And Biden has gaffed multiple times saying that we will defend Taiwan, basically saying that the one China policy is over. And this is, we severed official relations with Taipei in 1979 and recognized Beijing as the government of all of China. And but we have the strategic ambiguity policy where we don't say if we would militarily intervene or not in the case of a Chinese attack on Taiwan. But we're not supposed to have an embassy there. We're not supposed to have official relations. We're not supposed to have, we've been doing it for decades, but sending troops over there, we're supposed to basically provide them weaponry to defend themselves with. But under Biden, he's Tsai Ing-wen, who's pretty hawkish. The Democratic Progressive Party in Taiwan is very pro-independence. And this is something, Gareth Porter has a very good piece about this. People should read it, The Gray Zone. This started under Obama. Where basically we used to have a policy called dual deterrence. We were basically saying to China, okay, you don't know what we might do if you attack Taiwan. So just know that. And it's supposed to deter China. But we also tell the Taiwanese, hey, don't do anything provocative. Don't say you're declaring independence. Don't cause all these cross-strait tensions because you don't know if we may come to defend you or not. And so don't think you're going to have our support and you get into a fight you can't possibly win yourself. That could spiral out of control. And so in the past, they have actually... The Americans have leaned on Taiwan to basically, only allow certain, people who aren't that pro-independence or that hawkish to come to power. And at this, when Tsai Ing-wen had run previously, they did not support her. But under the Obama administration, that policy changed. And since then, as I said, they've just escalated by sending all these congressional delegations and high-level officials, starting with Alex Azar, who's like the health secretary under Trump. They sent him. It was the highest level official who had been to Taiwan since 1979. And it's been off to the races since then. Biden in April, I think, started lifting all these certain restrictions on, basically encouraging, as Ned Price would say, deepening our unofficial relationship with Taiwan. The reason why it's risky is it sends a message that we are getting closer and closer to saying we will, to reestablishing the defense commitment to Taiwan. And they had warned that this is a red line. But again, we've known since 2008 that Ukraine is the brightest of all red lines. William Burns, the current CIA director, told the Bush administration that when he was the ambassador to Russia. And he said there's nobody in the whole political elite, it's not just Putin. They don't see this potential Ukrainian membership in NATO as anything other than an existential threat to Russia. And it's, the Taiwan thing is arguably even more of a red line for China. And so, as McGregor said, every major invasion of China has been launched from Taiwan. Obviously, at the end of the Chinese Civil War, which we, we back Chiang Kai-shek. I mean, the estimates of people I've heard, like 15 million people died in that war. And eventually, when Mao won and the nationalist forces fled to Taiwan, they were going to attempt to retake the island, but the U.S. sailed aircraft carriers there and basically prevented them from doing it. And ever since then, look, there's been a lot of opportunities to attack Taiwan, and they haven't done it. They have a very robust trade relationship. I think, I don't know if it's 2020 or 2019, but something like $150 billion a year. The Taiwanese, China's Taiwan's greatest trading partner. I mean, there's a lot of reasons. There's millions of visits back and forth because these people are kin, from the mainland to the island. And there's a lot of reasons this war should not happen. The Chinese do not want to do it. It would be devastating for them in terms of their international standing, their economy, all kinds of things. It could really, I think they're the greatest food importer. They're entirely reliant on globalization, and they have a lot of problems with certain issues with demographics and economics, and they have a giant mortgage bubble. There's a lot of incentives for them to not do this. But what we are doing is we are trying to provoke them. I mean, that's pretty obvious. And I think it's, I don't know if they're trying to, because Lawrence Wilkerson told James Carden in, I think it's in the Asia Times where this piece is, but he told him that, look, this is Colin Powell's former chief of staff. He said, look, their plan is to fund this war in Ukraine, to stabilize Russia, and basically they want to see regime change in Moscow, and then they want to take on China. So, that's what the blob is doing right now. That's what the Biden administration really represents, because he's basically in a coma. So sending her there, to me, is just really the natural. It's extremely provocative and dangerous. We don't really know what they were going to do when she was escorted by, I think, 8 military warplanes, including F-15s. We had just earlier that month, we had the aircraft carrier, the USS Ronald Reagan, doing war drills in the South China Sea. We sent a destroyer again, I believe, through the Taiwan Strait, a warship anyway. In May, with the State Department's Taiwan fact sheet, or whatever it's called, they removed references to the One China policy. They removed references to not supporting Taiwan's independence forces, and China called them out for this. They have been very clear, especially since the beginning of this year, that this constant foreign intervention on our part in Taiwan and our support for the pro-independence forces could lead to a war between the U.S. and China. And we just have absolutely no interest in that on any level. And all the arguments about, well, semiconductors, it's just ridiculous. It's like saying we have to go to war and dominate the Middle East because of oil. We wasted trillions of dollars protecting sea lanes over the last several decades when they really weren't under threat at all. It was just waste. It's just an excuse for expanding the empire and fighting a bunch of unnecessary wars. And the truth is, this whole thing with China, maybe they think they can just sort of rattle the cage. They can get them to get, just to the brink of war without it actually happening. Or maybe they want them to attack Taiwan so they can have sort of a Ukraine situation where we fund their fight and let them die. McGregor just said recently the casualties in Ukraine are something like 60, 70,000. And I think that could, in worst case scenarios, that could be actually a conservative estimate at the end of the day when we eventually find out how many people have died. But they don't care. They're using Ukraine as a human battering ram against Russia. So I don't know what the real policy is. Logistically, getting weapons to Taiwan could be dangerous. But under Trump, they started sending them F-16s and AGM-E-84. I'm forgetting the exact name, but missiles from Lockheed that can, hit inland targets in China. Part of this Taiwan Policy Act 2022 is they potentially want to give them long-range missiles that are capable of striking, deep inside China. So, I don't know what the plan is, but they did this deliberately to provoke China. There's no possible other rationalization for this. If she wanted to tour some chip factory or talk about, whatever the Chips and Science Act and all this stuff, and whatever her husband's investments are, former investments, they could have all done that over like what we're doing right now or something. You know what I mean? Like they could have done all of that online. So this was just a 100% an unforced error, and I think they wanted it. They want China to be painted as this evil horrible state that we have to confront. And that is the direction everything is going. Like the Pentagon and all the ancillaries, the Air Force, the Navy, especially. I mean, Carlos Del Toro is the Secretary of the Navy. Frank Kendall, who's formerly of Raytheon, is Secretary of the Air Force. All of them have said in their confirmation hearings. I think Kendall said, I have three primary focuses: China, China, and China. And Josh Hawley asked Carlos Del Toro, "Do you think it's necessary that we be able to militarily defend Taiwan?" And Del Toro's like, "Absolutely. It's my primary focus is expanding our footprint in the Indo-Pacific and preparing basically for if I recall, I have it in one of my articles. The quote's not right there, but it's basically like we're preparing to have the capability to defend Taiwan." And the thing is there's reports out about how this Taiwan Policy Act of 2022 is being held up until September after the August recess. They were supposed to do work on it like last week. It was supposed to be called up on the Foreign Relations Committee. And so one of the things that Chris Murphy has said, who's the senator from from Connecticut, who's a Democrat, said that basically, or it said in the report, that one of the things that he wants to change is there's like there's a part of the proposal that says we need to mandate like a classified review by the Pentagon to go over and see what the plan is for the military to defend Taiwan. And it said, and he goes, can we change that to something like, how do we prepare to deter force by the Chinese military? Because, I mean, they're getting very close to saying that they will, Biden's already done it several times. And the truth is, like, as bad as it is having troops openly deployed to the mainland and training them for war with China and sending them all these arms some means I think 2020 alone, I think we sold something like $5 billion of weapons. And I think it's basically the worst thing we could do is to keep inching closer and closer to basically acknowledging and recognizing Taiwan's independence. And that's the most bipartisan thing right now in the China policy. I mean, they're racing each other, the Republicans and the Democrats, to lead the next delegation to go over there and to hype up these tensions and to show how brave they are and how tough they are on China and how much they support Taiwan. Meanwhile, they're just leading them to a slaughter. So it's just complete nonsense. But it's like I said in the article, this is basically the music that's been picked by the military-industrial complex, and all of them are just dancing to it. So the Republicans have to stop that, because if they do hate the Democrats, I mean, this is just, I mean, look at Pelosi. I mean, that's what this all gets us, is we get close to war with China, all for someone's personal vanity and just to serve the priorities of the military-industrial complex in the deep state.
100%, man. I titled this episode, "Don't Be a Dumbass for the Regime." So don't let your feelings about people who are going to be killed in these wars by other countries propel you into getting the United States more involved. Because as we've laid out here, the United States is already murdering plenty of people on a worldwide scale. If you care about people's rights, then clean your own house, end the empire here at home. Spreading the empire around the world more to counteract these other countries is not going to make lives better for the vast majority of people. Connor, where can people keep up with you? I've got your Twitter linked in the description, but you write at the Institute and you write for antiwar.com. So where can people keep up with all that stuff?
Both of those sites. You'll see I've got more articles coming out in the news section, and all my columns are usually run in the viewpoints section. So you'll see them all there. We run conflicts of interest as well at the antiwar.com blog. Conflicts of interest, my show with Kyle, that's at the Libertarian Institute in the right-hand margin. And all my articles will be right there in the featured articles page. And everybody check out the Libertarian Institute, because it's the best thing going in the libertarian movement right now. We got the best writers and the best podcasters.
For sure. Thanks for joining me, man. Great conversation. We'll have to talk again. I will be live streaming tomorrow night with Alex Stein. It was going to be on Tuesday night, but it's tomorrow night instead. So make sure you guys check in for that. That's going to be 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then we got some more stuff coming the end of the week. But thanks everyone for watching. And Connor, thanks for joining the show.
Thank you, Reed. Talk to you again soon. Peace, man.